Chapter 31:21. Secretary Sue didn't know what to do for a moment. Gouze lay down and said, "I'm a little tired. You can go back first." Secretary Sue nodded and left. Gouze was still lying down lazily. He reached out and touched his broken finger, sighing slightly. After a long time, he still lay down. He didn't sleep well that night. He tossed and turned, thinking about the despicable face on the billboard. In the middle of the night, he sat up abruptly. His back was covered in sweat. He dreamed of Sea City and the small grave under the moonlight. Gouze chuckled softly and murmured, "Who betrayed who, and who abandoned who?" After saying that, he closed his eyes tightly. When he opened them again, his eyes were like a world of ice and snow. There was no trace of weakness. That night, Gouze left the hospital and went home. It was still the villa where he lived before. He hired very few servants. One was to clean, and the other was to cook. The driver was from the company and didn't usually live here. It was common for Gouze to come home late, but it was not common for him to take a taxi and come back with bandages. The servants at home were all old and were very nervous. "Mr. Gou, what happened to your hand?" Gouze sat on the sofa in the living room and let out a long sigh. "It's nothing. It's just a slight fracture." He thought for a moment and whispered, "Is there any noodles in the kitchen? If there is, give me a bowl of noodles." He drank a little too much tonight, and his stomach was empty. Then he was angry and felt even worse now. The servant was relieved and smiled. "Okay, Mr. Gou, it'll be ready soon." In fact, Mr. Gou was a good person. He paid a high salary and didn't come home often. When he did come home, he was also very easy to serve. He was many times better than other people. So the two older servants were willing to take care of the man. However, Mr. Gou was 35 years old and had never married. It was said that he had a fiancée, but she had never come to visit. They probably didn't have a good relationship. The servant quickly prepared the noodles. It was vegetable and egg noodles. After it was ready, a few drops of sesame oil were added. It was very fragrant. Gouze sat down and lit a cigarette with one hand. He smoked with his fractured hand and ate his noodles with the other. "Mr. Gou, your hand is already like this. You should smoke less," the servant advised. Gouze was stunned. He looked at the slightly aged face, put out his cigarette, and focused on eating his noodles. Soon, he finished the bowl of noodles. When he slowly went upstairs, he untied his tie with one hand and wanted to take a shower in a bathroom. But when he walked into the bedroom, he remembered that his hand was injured. He rolled up his tie with one hand and sat on the sofa in the living room for a long time before walking into the bathroom. This place hadn't changed in 2 years. The only thing that hadn't changed was the mirror in the bathroom. On it, the words that Lin Cece had written with lipstick were still there. Gouze didn't allow anyone to erase it. He didn't know why he was so persistent. Was it to remind himself that that person was no longer here? After casually washing her face, she returned to the bedroom and lay down on the bed. She still couldn't fall asleep, so she browsed the news. The headlines were about the scandal between Chin Mo and Lin Cece. There were pictures of them leaving the hotel and sitting in the car. The paparazzi were the most ruthless. They also took pictures of Gouze. The title was especially ugly, saying that he was a cuckold. His marriage with Lin Cece had long been turned upside down by the media. She didn't expect that there would still be people making an article about it. Chapter 31:22. Gouze threw his phone aside. He didn't want to look at this annoying news anymore. But when he closed his eyes, he saw Lin Cece sitting in Chin Mo's car. She leaned over when Chin Mo got into the car. The more he thought about it, the more annoyed he became. He sat up and smoked. He smoked one cigarette after another. Finally, he turned on his phone and saw another piece of news. It shouldn't be news. It was the kiss Lin Cece gave to Chin Mo on his birthday last year. In the photo, Lin Cece's lips were pressed against Chin Mo's cheek. Chin Mo's gaze was very gentle. No matter how he looked at it, there was a hint of warmth. Gouze held the phone and looked at it coldly. Then, he smashed the phone against the opposite wall. With a bang, the custom-made phone broke into pieces. Gouze panted. He suddenly fell onto the bed and covered his head with the blanket. The servant downstairs heard the noise and ran up. He didn't even bother to knock on the door. When he opened the door, he saw the broken pieces on the floor. He asked in a panicked voice, "Is Mr. Gu hurt?" Guze turned his body and said in a low voice, "I'm fine. You guys can go and rest first." The servant looked at him and sighed before going downstairs. Guze continued to lie down. He couldn't sleep and his head hurt badly. He wanted to get up and drink a bottle of vodka. That would probably numb him, but the doctor said that he shouldn't touch alcohol if he wanted the bones in his hand to be intact. So he resisted the urge and lay on the bed without moving. Early in the morning, when she was about to fall asleep, the landline phone at the bedside rang. It rang one after another. Guze thought it was his secretary, so he answered without looking at the caller ID. "I'm Guze," but it wasn't Su Qiaonan on the other end of the phone. It was Wen Xian, his fiancée in name. Wen Xian's voice was very gentle. "Guze, did you see the entertainment news last night?" Guze's fingers tightened around the elevator. "Did you call just to talk about something so boring?" "Boring things? I don't think so. Guze, I heard that you got into a car accident last night. As your fiancé, I have to show some concern for you, right?" When Xian was still gentle. Guze sneered, "Is that so? Are you sure you're not gloating?" "A little bit, but I think that compared to your physical pain, Guze, the pain in your heart should be more severe." Guze narrowed his eyes. "What are you trying to say?" When Xinwen smiled faintly. "I'm laughing at you. Everyone else has let it go. Why are you the only one who can't? Guze, you were the one who abandoned her. Are you regretting it now? In the past 2 years, she had been very good at using Lin Cece to stab him. Guze was used to it. However, when there was no one around, he was still not used to it. Every time when Xinwen provided him with new news, it would make him half die of anger, and most of it was about Lin Cece scandals. She had scandals with various rich businessmen, the Qin siblings, and Lan Yu, especially now that he had seen it with his own eyes. Guze's voice was slightly cold. "This has nothing to do with you." When Xinwen was terrifyingly gentle. "How can it have nothing to do with me? Guze, I'm your fiancé. It's only right for me to care about you." Guze hung up the phone. On the other side, when Xinwen was victorious, but she couldn't smile. Had she won? Chapter 31-23. Guze hadn't broken off the engagement with her because he didn't want to admit that he was wrong. He didn't want to admit that he had lost his true love. He had always firmly believed that Lin Cece and the little fool he had married back then were not the same person. In fact, he was just deceiving himself. He had a body and that memory. How could it not be his soul? When Xian could see clearly that the more he tried to escape, the deeper he loved her. And she would use Lin Cece to stab him until his entire body was covered in blood. On the other side, Guze threw away the phone. He couldn't lie in bed for another minute, but when he walked to the bathroom and saw the mirror, his mood became even worse. He threw the razor in his hand onto the mirror, and the fragments splashed everywhere. His injured hand was cut by the fragments again, and blood dripped down, but he didn't care. He looked at the broken mirror. Occasionally, there were words written by Lin Cece with lipstick, but they were already broken. He touched it gently and smiled silently. In the morning, 2 workers came to the villa and replaced the mirror in the bathroom. And those fragments were personally thrown into the trash can by Guze. After throwing them away, he felt relaxed, as if he had thrown away someone's memory. Later, he also asked his assistant to clean up a small apartment of 80 square meters that he had bought at that time. He didn't ask who he had sold it to. He only knew that it had been cleaned up. He erased all the memories that belonged to Lin Cece or the little fool. He had never touched the villa in Sea City, but he never went there again. He didn't go there for 2 years. In the future, he didn't plan to go there anymore. After doing this, Guze felt that life was more comfortable. He recuperated in the villa for a few days, and his hand bones were also healed. Then, he went to the company. He deliberately didn't pay attention to the entertainment gossip. He didn't want to hear any news about Lin Cece, but in the company's pantry, the bathroom, and even in the middle of the meeting, he always heard her name. Some were gossiping about her. Some were women's complaints, saying that a demon had appeared in B City, but most of the male subordinates were interested in her, which also made Guze very angry. Very quickly, Hung Tong came up with a rule that no one was allowed to talk about female celebrities during working hours. As for which female celebrity it was, everyone had a tacit understanding, especially the male employees. They did not dare to casually talk about it anymore. It was obvious that President Gu could not forget it. They would only care about Lin Cece if they were courting death. Hung Tong had calmed down, and Guze's mood was much better. Everything had returned to how it was before. He went to work, got off work, drove alone, ate alone. He lived the life of a single dog, occasionally socializing with clients. He didn't look at Lin Cece's lace anymore. Because of this, he rarely touched his phone or newspapers. Guze knew that this was an illness and had to be treated, but he allowed himself to be like this. Slowly, he forgot about that night and the way she and Chinemo were together. In a certain high-class club, Guze was slowly washing his hands in the washroom. He raised his eyes, and the depth of his eyes was somewhat ruthless. Just now, he had taken care of a few guest rooms in H City, and Su Qiaonan had arranged for a few young girls to be with him. A business deal worth billions was finally concluded. Chapter 31-24. But that was the kind of person he was. Most businessmen were like that. Yi Muyun had been like that in the past. He had seen his methods from the beginning, and after he went into business alone, he only made it bigger. Guze tidied himself up in front of the mirror and was about to go home when he saw someone he shouldn't have seen. Lin Cece. She was leaning against the aisle, and her head was slightly tilted back, revealing her fair and beautiful neck. Her eyes were slightly closed on her delicate face, but there was an indescribable flirtatious look on her face. Especially the abnormal redness on her face, it proved that she might have been drugged. Guze looked at her quietly for 2 seconds with a very cold expression. After a long time, he walked past her like a stranger, as if he had never seen her before. Lin Cece's breath stopped. She tilted her head and called out to Guze softly. He stopped in his tracks and then sneered. "Don't you hate me? Why are you calling me? Shouldn't you call Chinemo to save you?" He had been in the business world for a long time, and it wasn't like he didn't know that those rich people didn't care about celebrities and models. But so what? She asked for it, and it had nothing to do with him. She had nothing to do with him a long time ago. Guze wanted to leave, but his arm was caught by her. He paused again. "Let go." "No." Her voice was very soft, but it went into his ears and turned into some unknown drug that made his body heat up. He thought it was because of anger. This time, Guze gritted his teeth and said in a more forceful tone, "Let go." She still didn't let go. Guze forcefully broke free. He quickly walked to the end of the aisle until he reached the elevator. No one chased after him. When he walked into the elevator and turned around, he saw that Lin Cece was still leaning against the wall. As the elevator went down, Guze closed his eyes and recalled that her fingers were abnormally hot just now. It was obvious that she had been drugged. What did she want? Did she want him to use his body to help her? Did she want him to write, "I hate you" on the bathroom mirror tomorrow? Or threaten him to kill him again? Guze smiled eerily. He lit a cigarette and took a puff before putting it out. He knew all too well what the consequences would be if she stayed up there after being drugged. However, he thought that she probably wouldn't care. All these years, Chinemo had done a lot of things to her. The elevator door opened, and he walked out without hesitation. When he got into the car, he was not as hesitant. He lazily leaned against the back of the seat and casually bent his elbow on the window. He lit a cigarette and slowly smoked. Amidst the smoke, the image of Lin Cece flashed across his mind. He slowly took his time, and throughout the entire process, his eyebrows were still furrowed. After finishing his cigarette, he opened the car door. His steps were much faster than when he had come down. He returned to the same floor, but Lin Cece was nowhere to be seen. The veins on Guze's forehead twitched slightly as he began to search room by room. The doors of the high-class clubhouse were kicked open one by one, and screams could be heard coming from inside. Most of them were men and women with disheveled clothes. Guze's Adam's apple kept moving up and down as he kicked open the innermost door. Chapter 31-25. Guze watched as a middle-aged man in his 40s pressed down on Lin Cece's body. It was only then that he wanted to take advantage of her that he tore off half of his clothes. He sneered, picked up the man, and threw a punch at him. With a bang, the man fell onto the hard table. Shunin screamed, but before he could get up, Guze picked him up again and threw him against the wall again. This time, blood gushed out like a pillar. His body straightened up, but he couldn't get up. Lin Cece's body leaned against the wall, and she looked over with her eyes wide open. "Let's go." Guze grabbed her hand and said firmly. She wanted to move away, but she couldn't. Just like that, she was taken out of the private room. The elevator went all the way down, and she only came to her senses when they reached his car. Without saying anything, she wanted to get out of the car. Guze's fingers gripped the steering wheel, and his voice was a little hoarse. "Getting out of the car like that, are you going to get raped or rape someone else?" She pursed her lips and looked at him stubbornly, and there were some tears in her eyes. Guze looked ahead. "Do I send you home or to my place?" His meaning was very clear. She would either go back to her own home after taking the medicine, or find someone to do it herself, or go back to his place, and he would help her. Lin Cece calmed down at this moment. The medicine in her body was acting up again. She raised her head slightly, and her voice was a little broken and almost inaudible. "Let's go to the hotel." Guze's slender fingers tapped on the steering wheel. After a long while, he said softly, "Are you sure?" The way he spoke to her was very strange, as if they had never known each other before. It didn't seem like they had been husband and wife. And indeed, he had never treated Lin Cece as his wife. His wife had always been that little fool, and that little fool was already dead. He asked her once, but she didn't say anything and just closed her eyes slightly. He knew and didn't say anything else. He started the car and drove to the nearest five-star hotel. Very quickly, he got the room card and swiped it to the presidential suite on the top floor. On the soft bed, a man and a woman were entangled, letting their desires pull them into the vortex of fate. Her dress was scattered all over the floor. Some of it was sexy, but most of it was sexy. Just when she was in the most unbearable pain, Guze stopped. Lin Cece opened her eyes, and her red lips parted slightly. Her voice was husky and charming. "Guze, what's wrong?" Guze's eyes were fixed on her. After a long time, he propped himself up. She tried to lift her body, but he held her down. Lin Cece looked into his eyes with her blurry eyes. Guze lowered his head again and whispered in her ear, "Didn't you say you hate me? Are you begging me for you now? You bastard." Lin Cece spat out 3 words and moved again, but Guze grabbed her hand with a sneer and dragged her into the bathroom. He turned on the cold water and splashed it on her body. When the cold water splashed on her body, she suddenly became much more rational and realized how unbearable she was. She said no and tried to hide from the cold water, but Guze still rushed at her body without a care. Chapter 31:26. Lin Cece was tormented by him. Her body was shivering from the cold water, and she collapsed on the cold ground. She didn't struggle anymore. She leaned against the wall behind her and looked at him with her face tilted. Suddenly, she laughed. It was a heartless laugh. Her chin was sharp, and her face was flushed, which made her facial features even more exquisite. Moreover, the drug had not been removed, so there was a touch of flirtatiousness in her eyes and brows. Her red lips moved slightly, and her voice was hoarse, as if she was mocking him. "You hate me." Guze's eyes narrowed dangerously, and Lin Cece laughed even more unbridled. She pointed her chin at him. "You hate me for taking this body, don't you?" She even wrapped her arms around his neck and said, "You miss her?" Guze's whole body was tense, and his face was livid. Lin Cece began to laugh. "I can't tell that President Gu is such an infatuated president, but you didn't make such a choice at that time." She was still breathing at him, but her voice was as cold as ice. "So, President Gu, don't dwell on the past. It's obviously much happier to be a person who is the same on the outside and inside." She didn't care about him anymore. She let go of him and fiddled with her clothes. Seeing that she could still get out, she wanted to get up. However, a strong arm grabbed her hand, and his voice was extremely gloomy. "Do you want to leave just like that?" Lin Cece chuckled. "What else can I do?" Guze turned his face to her, and she could see his face clearly. Lin Cece was stunned, and she wanted to push him away and escape. That was because his eyes were too terrifying. But Guze hugged her waist. His palms were very hot, with a scorching temperature. She fell into his arms. His whole body was firm, and she almost felt pain from the impact. He didn't say anything, but just tore off all the clothes on her body and threw them aside. It was almost like he was taking her violently. "Guze, you bastard!" Lin Cece scolded him, but she was still dragged by him from behind. This was an emotionless union. He didn't give her a trace of gentleness. He was rough and violent. She hated it very much, but after being played with by him, the drug in her body started to act up again. Even though it was painful, she still couldn't help but reach out and hug him. What followed was a tempestuous storm. They forgot the love and hate they once had. They forgot everything. All that was left was the innocent Yuwang of a man and a woman. Entangled again and again, he forgot about time, forgot about everything. Only when the sky gradually turned bright did it slowly calm down. Lin Cece fainted. Her face was pale as she fell into Guze's arms. Guze was still warm. He looked at the unconscious man under him and gritted his teeth. She was drugged, but he felt that he was the one who had taken the drug. It had only been one night, yet it had not completely disappeared. He rolled to the side, calmed himself down, and went to the bathroom to wash his body. When he came back, he saw that Lin Cece's face was abnormally red. He hesitated and reached out to touch her face. It was boiling hot. Guze was shocked and immediately called his private doctor. It was early in the morning, and the doctor took a long time to answer the phone. Guze said a few words in a low voice and hung up. Then he went to the bathroom, carefully wrung a hot towel, and cleaned her up carefully. He turned on the light and saw that she was injured. Chapter 31:27. Of course, it wouldn't be the first time. When they were husband and wife, they had done it countless times. Of course, the little fool was very silly. Every time she cried, she only knew that he was the one who bullied her. Now, Guze's eyes darkened. She might not be thinking the same way. She must think that he was taking advantage of her. But it didn't matter. She was not that person anymore. What she thought had nothing to do with him. After cleaning her up, Guze went to the window to smoke a cigarette while looking outside to see if the doctor had arrived. The doctor arrived very quickly. He was almost wiping his sweat, and he was still wearing his pajamas. Walking upstairs, he smelled the scent of a man and a woman making love in the bedroom. What else was there to be confused about? So he calmed himself down and measured the temperature. 39 degrees, 8 degrees. It's almost 40 degrees. The doctor coughed. "Mr. Gu, is this lady hurt?" Looking at the time, it seemed that they had been doing it for a whole night. That was why he asked. Guze's face stiffened. After a while, he said softly, "A little. Then it's inflammation. I'll give you an injection. If the fever doesn't go down tonight, you have to go to the hospital." The doctor began to prepare the needle and said, "After the injection, take the medicine in the afternoon and evening. If the temperature doesn't exceed 39 degrees, continue to take the medicine for 2 more days. Take good care of yourself during these 2 days. As for sex, you can't have it for a week." Guze didn't say anything, and the doctor recognized Lin Cece's face. Wasn't this Mr. Gu's ex-wife? How did his ex-wife get together again? Moreover, Mr. Gu had a fiancée, and there were many scandals about her. The doctor had doubts, but it wasn't appropriate for him to ask. He gave her the injection and medicine and sat for a while. Before leaving, he gave her an ointment and rubbed his nose. He said uncomfortably, "Apply this, you'll get better faster." Guze took it, and his expression was a little strange. After sending the doctor away, he walked upstairs. The servant asked, "Mr. Gu, what would you like for breakfast?" Guze had no appetite at this time, but thinking of the patient upstairs, he hesitated and said, "Cook some porridge. Don't call me. I'll come down and get it myself." The servants knew that Mr. Gu had brought a woman home last night. There had been a lot of commotion at night. The girl had been screaming and crying, and Mr. Gu's heavy breathing had been earth-shattering. So when the doctor came early in the morning, it was Mr. Gu who had broken the girl. They were all experienced people, so they knew exactly how it was broken and where it was broken. The servants didn't dare to say anything and went to make porridge. With an ashen face, Guzé stood there for a while longer before he slowly went upstairs with the medicine. Lin Cece was still asleep. Guzé did not enter immediately. Instead, he leaned against the door and looked down at the ointment. Applying this ointment was also a very intimate thing. He and she now, apart from loathing each other, there was nothing else. As for the sex incident last night, it was really due to the effects of the drug and anger. He thought that if it was possible for everything to go back to normal, they would rather it never happened. His body is content, but still abhorrent. Guzé's expression was very indifferent. He slowly walked over and decided to wipe it for her. After all, he was the one who had hurt her. He told himself that when her injury was healed and her fever was gone, he would ask her to leave immediately. With this thought in mind, the way he pulled the blanket away was a little rough, and it hurt her. Lin Cece frowned and cried out in pain. She tilted her head and fell asleep again. Chapter 31:28. Guzé's Adam's apple kept bobbing up and down. He felt that bringing her back was a mistake. His body had been abstinent for a few years, but at this moment, he couldn't take it anymore. He had clearly done it for a whole night, but now he wanted to hug a woman again. He was a little annoyed, so his actions weren't gentle, and he quickly wiped it for her. When he covered her with the blanket, even he felt that his breathing was unbelievably rough. Naturally, the way he looked at her wasn't very gentle, but she was sick and almost in a coma. Even if he glared at her to death, she wouldn't have any reaction. He would only be angry at her. Guzé had expended a lot of energy that night, but he didn't feel sleepy at all. He sat on the sofa opposite the bed and stared at the person on the bed as if he was looking at a poison. He knew very well that if he called Chin Mo or Lan Yu now and asked them to take her away, everything would be over. He didn't think that he was being too harsh on her. She was drugged, and she was the one who provoked him. He wanted her, but it took a lot of energy. Moreover, they didn't have any feelings for each other in the first place. As he was thinking about this, another voice in his heart interrupted his thoughts. If you don't have feelings for each other, why did you bring her back? Why didn't you leave her to fend for herself? His instinct retorted again. Because that was the little fool's body. The voice said again, "Didn't you say that the little fool was dead?" Guzé closed his eyes slightly, and his expression was extremely pained. Yes, the little fool was dead, and he actually had a glimmer of hope. Just now, he almost thought that if Lin Cece's fever was a little stronger, would she become a little fool again? Would his little fool be able to come back? A broken sound came from his throat. He placed his hand on his eyelashes and laughed softly. Dream on. Guzé just sat there for a long time. When it was almost noon, he got up and reached out to touch Lin Cece's forehead. It wasn't so hot anymore. He retracted his hand and hesitated for a moment before walking downstairs. The servant looked at him. "Sir, do you want to have lunch?" Guzé took his coat, lowered his head, and gently dialed the car key. "No, I'll go upstairs and see Miss Lin later. If she wakes up, prepare lunch for her and ask the driver to take her home." The servant understood and nodded. "What if Miss Lin asks about you?" "Her?" A bitter smile appeared on Guzé's face. "She won't ask. She hates me." The servant's heart froze. Mr. Hate. What he said. Could it be that the tremors last night were fake? What's wrong with young people nowadays? Can they hug someone and roll around when they hate them? However, the servant didn't dare to say these words. He watched Guzé leave and went upstairs. Lin Cece woke up. At the same time, the sound of a car engine starting came from downstairs. The servant did not speak at first, paying attention to whether Miss Lin would ask about Sir. However, as Sir said, Miss Lin only frowned and did not ask. And down the room. And down. And Lin's Zay. And down. The servant sighed and then asked in a low voice, "Miss Lin, do you want to eat something? Lunch is ready." Lin Cece's body hurt when she moved, but she endured it and said softly, "I'll go downstairs to eat. Is there any women's clothes here?" Chapter 31:29. She had slept with other people's men, and a piece of clothing was not a big deal. After she asked, the servant hesitated. She thought for a moment and said, I don't think so. Sir never brings women home for the night. After saying that, she felt that it was not very convincing, so she secretly looked at Lin Cece. Lin Cece didn't seem to care and smiled lightly. If it's not convenient for you to look for them, I'll go look for them. She was actually not familiar with this place. When she was his wife, she only lived in Sea City. She had never been to this place. It was only on the day of his engagement that he brought her here. He carried her on a master bedroom bed and made love to her fiercely. She had never been to a place like the changing room. Lin Cece wore a bathrobe and opened the cabinets one by one. They were all Guze's clothes, and there was not a single piece of female clothing. The servant felt that she shouldn't stay any longer. It was better not to interfere in the matter between Sir and Miss Lin. It was better not to even know about it. The servant raised her voice outside. Miss Lin, I'll go down to prepare dinner first. Lin Cece was stunned for a moment. She said yes, and then stared blankly at the box in the drawer. She was familiar with the box, and the things inside were even more familiar. It used to belong to her, and then it was returned to Guze. She reached out, held it hesitantly, and opened it. There was a very cute diamond ring inside. It was specially made by Guze in the shape of several fruits. There was a strawberry with red diamonds, a banana with yellow diamonds, and a cherry with pink diamonds. It was the one and only diamond ring in the world. Just because she was silly at that time, he had ordered such a ring for her. She still remembered that when she put it on, she smiled happily, hugged him, and jumped up and down and kissed him. Of course, he carried her upstairs and kissed her many times. That night, he wanted her for the whole night. He didn't spend many days with her. Every time he went to Sea City, he wanted her for the whole night. She didn't have time to talk to him, even if she wanted to. But when she saw his intoxicated expression when he did it, as if he was very happy, she was also happy at this time. Seeing the object, Lin Cece's face showed a touch of bitterness. She used to think that he liked her, but he abandoned her so easily. It was the right choice. She couldn't blame him for it now. Moreover, without his stimulation, she wouldn't be able to remember anything even if she got into a car accident. She wouldn't be able to return to normal, and she might be a little fool for the rest of her life. However, she thought that would be better for her to be a little fool for the rest of her life. She wouldn't feel pain, but wouldn't it hurt? Even if she was a little fool, he would still throw her away, so it was better to be normal. Lin Cece held the ring and stared at it for a long time, feeling bitter for a long time. In the end, she still put the ring back, but she didn't notice that when she put the box back, the position was a little different from before, and this difference was actually noticed by Guze. After searching for a long time, she couldn't find any clothes to wear. In the end, she had no choice but to call her assistant. The assistant was used by Qinshin before, and now she was using it. It was good to be familiar with the assistant. Little Red answered the phone and said that she would be here in an hour. Lin Cece did not object. She could take a shower and eat something during this time. Life was already very bitter, and she didn't want to mistreat herself anymore. When she passed by the sink after her shower, she saw the mirror. Chapter 31:30. She smiled. It was quite normal. It would be abnormal if she didn't fall. She only spaced out for a while before she went downstairs. She wasn't feeling well, but she wanted to eat because she hadn't eaten for more than 24 hours. Although the servant wasn't familiar with her, she was very dedicated. The dishes were excellent and suited the patient's taste. Lin Cece liked the light Sanxian soup very much. She couldn't help but think of someone when she ate it. The aunt in Sea City. She left Guze with the intention of breaking up with Guze, so she gave up everything in Sea City. She hadn't been to that villa since she left. She didn't want anything in it. Her clothes, the trinkets that Guze gave her, the aunt in Guze, she didn't want them. She couldn't afford them. However, this soup reminded her of her auntie. She felt a little guilty. The aunt had been very good to her. After she left, she didn't know if Guze fired the aunt and if that place was still there. But she just thought about it and didn't want to confirm it. Sea City was a wound on Lin Cece's body, a wound that she didn't want to open easily. Miss Lin, is it to your taste? The servant asked softly. Although Miss Lin wasn't Sir's girlfriend, she was very beautiful. Plus, she was missing a part of her little finger. It was quite distressing for such a beautiful girl to lose a small part of her finger. Moreover, the servant had a feeling that Miss Lin was very important to Mr. Gu. Sometimes, hate was more love than love. Lin Cece came back to her senses and smiled. It's quite good. She looked down. It reminds me of an elder who took care of me. Her cooking is as good as yours. The servant was flattered. Oh, I see. I'll cook more for Miss Lin in the future. Lin Cece didn't say anything and just drank the soup. The servant paused for a moment before he understood and said apologetically, Miss Lin, I'm really sorry. It's okay. You're considerate. Lin Cece smiled lightly. She was probably thinking of the aunt, so her expression was very gentle. The servant didn't dare to say anything more and just took care of the meal. After eating, he specially prepared a cup of fruit tea for Lin Cece. Lin Cece was also used to it. She read the magazine while waiting for Xiao Hong, which was very natural. Xiao Hong soon came over and brought a set of clothes for Lin Cece to change into. Lin Cece didn't stay after changing. Although she was still a little uncomfortable, she left soon. The servant sighed for a long time when he was cleaning the fruit tea. When Guze came back, it was already 7 or 8 in the evening. He put on his coat and his eyes swept across the hall. The servant served dinner and came over. Sir, are you talking about Miss Lin? Guze looked down. What did she say? Xiao Hong, the servant said. Gu Lin. Xiao Hong Hong Hong, tea. He didn't know why he was saying this to his servant. It was probably because he had no one to say it to. Guze ate. Actually, he rarely came back for dinner. He came back tonight mainly to ask some questions. Chapter 31:31. Guze put down his chopsticks and frowned. She rummaged through the wardrobe. The servant didn't dare to say anything and only replied. Miss Lin asked if there were any women's clothes here. Guze frowned even more. What happened to you? The servant looked at his face and whispered. I said that Sir wouldn't bring a woman back for the night. Guze relaxed a little and picked up another piece of sweet and sour fish with his chopsticks. What did she say later? Miss Lin didn't say anything. She only said that she didn't mind wearing clothes that had been worn by others. Guze slammed his chopsticks on the table again and sneered. Yes, she's already asleep, let alone clothes. She's really careless. These words couldn't help but remind him of the day when he and Wenwan got engaged a few years ago, when Lin Cece pretended to be a little fool and made him embarrassed. Until now, Guze didn't want to recall it. Guze didn't say anything, and the servant didn't dare to say anything. After a long time, she saw Guze eat again. He didn't eat much, but at least he ate a little. After eating, Guze slowly went upstairs. Halfway, he turned his head and asked, Did she take medicine when she woke up? The servant thought for a moment. I don't think so. Guze was a little absent-minded, and after a while, he smiled faintly. Okay, I got it. He didn't say anything more, just walked upstairs until he reached the master bedroom and pushed open the door. There was still a faint smell of love in the air, and the fragrance of women filled the nose, causing a commotion. Guze walked in slowly, took the medicine on the bedside table, looked at it for a long time, and threw it into the trash can, as well as all the things she left here. Just like in the past, he didn't keep any of them. Leaving any of them would hurt his heart. He didn't want to think about it, so he changed the bedsheets himself, changed everything, threw away the bedsheets, and threw away everything. After doing all this, he went to the locker room to get clothes to take a shower. When he stepped into the locker room, he couldn't help but think of what he had just said downstairs. Lin Cece entered his changing room and rummaged through the things here. Guze took a change of clothes and slowed down. Finally, he opened a drawer and his eyes fell on a small box. His gaze froze. That box was too passive. It was Lin Cece who moved. He narrowed his eyes, picked up the box, and opened it. The light from the ring was dazzling and adorable. One of a kind. A trace of warmth flashed through Guze's eyes. This was the warmth that only belonged to him for the little idiot. But then his gaze became somewhat cold, and he clenched the ring tightly. He went out and dialed a number. It was Lin Cece's. He took it from her phone last night. She was unconscious at the time, so she shouldn't have known. At this moment, He dialed a number and held his breath as he waited for the call to go through. However, it wasn't her who picked up the phone. It was her assistant. The assistant's voice was a little hoarse. I'm Lynn Cece's assistant. Miss Lynn is sick and hospitalized. She needs to recuperate. Any work has to be postponed. Guzé furrowed his brows. What illness? The assistant was stunned for a moment and realized that this wasn't a client. Hence, she said cautiously, she has a fever, a common cold. Common cold and fever? Who was she trying to fool? He knew better than anyone what her illness was. She was here to treat him. Didn't her fever go down? Why did she have to go to the hospital again? Guzé didn't say anything else and hung up the phone. On the other side, Little Red looked at the phone and muttered to herself, that's really strange. This person hung up just like that. I wonder who's playing a prank. Chapter 31-32. Little Red gave the phone to Lynn Cece. Lynn Cece took it and looked at it. She was stunned. What's wrong with Cece? Little Red saw her expression and asked softly. Lynn Cece forced a smile and said, I'm fine. She put the phone back in its original place and leaned back to lie down. Her body was still feverish, but it wasn't too serious. But she was brought here by Little Red. She said that Little Red was making a fuss, but Little Red just smiled. But it was undeniable that the feeling of being cared for was very warm. She lay down. Her body was a little tired, so she didn't think about Guzé anymore. They didn't have anything to do with each other, so she shouldn't change anything just for one night. She hated him, but she didn't hate him anymore. She didn't love him anymore, so she didn't hate him anymore. Besides, she had taken revenge on him, so there was no point in not letting it go. That was what Lynn Cece thought, but it wasn't what the little fool thought. Little fool. Lynn Cece pursed her lips and smiled bitterly, forcing herself to forget. Little Red kept watching over her when she fell asleep. Lanyu, Qin Shun, and Qin Mo both came to see her, but she fell asleep. Qin Shun looked at her sleeping soundly. He pulled Little Red over and asked softly, what happened? Little Red hesitated for a moment before telling him about Lynn Cece and Guzé. I received a call. She was wearing Guzé's bathrobe. She must have stayed overnight. Qin Shun took another look and sighed. Why are we in the same place again? Little Red didn't dare to say anything. She knew what happened a few years ago and felt that Cece was very pitiful at that time. Cece didn't seem to care about leaving Guzé, but when she was with Cece, there would always be someone crying at night. It was easy to love someone, but how could it be so easy to forget someone? Little Red looked at Qin Shun and said softly, then what should we do? When she wakes up, we'll see her attitude. Qin Shun said calmly, Cece is an adult. She has her own thoughts. Tell me if there's anything. Don't stop her. Little Red nodded. Qin Shun went to take care of it for a while and left with the food he brought. She went downstairs with Lanyu. Instead of taking the elevator, the couple took the emergency staircase. As they walked, Qin Shun said, Lanyu, when Cece is discharged, should we bring her back to stay for a few days? What's wrong? Lanyu held his wife's hand in surprise. Qin Shun paused for a moment before slowly saying, Cece and Guzé were together last night. Lanyu stopped and looked at his wife with a frown. What do you mean by together? Qin Shun took another look at him and reached out to hold his arm. Do you really want me to be so straightforward? He paused for a moment, then said, we slept together for one night. Little Red went to investigate. That night, Cece was drugged and happened to meet Guzé. Lanyu's frown deepened. She's had enough to live after becoming famous these years. She can totally quit the entertainment industry. He lowered his voice. Qin Shun, you know that Cece isn't a vain person. When you have time, try to persuade her. She listens to you the most. Qin Shun nodded. After a while, he said, Lanyu, under what circumstances do you think a person can easily find each other? Lanyu thought for a moment, standing very high and in a very conspicuous place. Chapter 31-33. Qin Shun smiled. Why do you think Cece doesn't quit the entertainment circle? Lanyu and her mind were connected. He only needed to think for a moment to understand. However, he still found it unbelievable. Cece, she still likes that bastard Guzé. It's not like it's hate. Qin Shin sighed. She thinks she has forgotten and let go, but she probably hasn't. If she does, she will leave this city. Mrs. Lin and Mr. Lin have already gone to live in a city. Cece should be accompanying them. Who do you think she is staying here for? Lan Yu was silent. The couple held hands and walked downstairs. After a long time, Qin Shin whispered, I know you don't agree, and I don't either. Let's not even talk about the hurt Cece has suffered. Just Gu Zhe sighed. He should like Cece, but he likes the little fool who lost her memory, not the current Cece. After saying that, she seemed to think for a long time before continuing. She should know Gu Zhe's feelings, so she is unwilling. She was abandoned by Gu Zhe once, but in fact, she was abandoned again. Because she is no longer a little fool, Gu Zhe doesn't want her anymore. Lan Yu was confused and asked, didn't Cece not want him anymore? Then do you think that if Cece didn't regain her memory and made a scene at Gu Zhe's engagement ceremony, would Gu Zhe not want her anymore? Qin Shin smiled. She pointed out the key point. Lan Yu was silent and didn't speak for a long time. He only held Qin Shin's hand before getting into the car. You think more than me, and you are more comprehensive than me. I've never thought about this at all. You are a man, so your thoughts are naturally not as meticulous as mine. Besides, you always oppose Gu Zhe, and every time you mention it, you hate him. How can Cece reveal anything in front of you? Qin Shin smiled and whispered to her husband in the car. Lan Yu slowly buckled the seatbelt and looked at her. He leaned his head against her and sighed. Qin Shin, I feel very happy now. In the past 2 or 3 years, they had a very good relationship. Although Qin Shin didn't remember anything, he didn't care if he couldn't remember. It was no good for Cece to think about it. Unlike Qin Shin, Lan Yu and his wife kissed for a while before starting the car. The couple talked about Lin Cece from time to time and finally decided to send her to a city for a few days after she recovered. But no one expected that the next day, Gu Zhe and Lin Cece would make the headlines. It was a photo of them hugging and kissing. The photo was very clear, especially their expressions. It made people think of a story. Now Gu Zhe's status would not change because of a nude photo. But looking at the photo, he couldn't help thinking. On the top floor of Hung Tone Group, his slender fingers tapped on the surface of the desk. After a while, he leaned back. Su Qiaonan came in with a stack of documents and put them in front of him. She smiled and said, President Gu, this is the information I sorted out today. It is needed for tomorrow's meeting. Put it here, Gu Zhe said lightly. Su Qiaonan nodded and was about to leave when she saw the newspaper in Gu Zhe's hand. She was stunned and smiled. President Gu, if there is such a scandal, you can ask the Public Relations Department to hold a press conference to clarify it. She thought that President Gu had a fiancé, so it was better to have less of this kind of news. Chapter 31-34. Su Qiaonan was stunned again. President Gu, it's not necessary. Gu Zhe glanced over and Su Qiaonan froze. She couldn't help but say, I'll make an appointment right away. She wanted to leave, but Gu Zhe immediately said, let's make an appointment here. Su Qiaonan looked reluctant, but she didn't dare to disobey Gu Zhe's order. She walked to the side and dialed a few numbers. Finally, she got the number of Lin Cece's assistant, Little Red. After dialing, she said a few words, and then her expression became even worse. She turned to look at Gu Zhe and said softly, President Gu, Lin Cece's assistant said that Lin Cece is sick and doesn't want to see her. Gu Zhe narrowed his eyes and looked at her. I'll give you the phone. Su Qiaonan passed the phone to him and said calmly, her phone is turned off. Gu Zhe's frown deepened. He dialed the number. It was indeed the cold voice of the mobile phone. He returned the phone to Su Qiaonan and said calmly, you can leave now. After Su Qiaonan went out, Gu Zhe picked up his phone and dialed Lin Cece's number. It was still Little Red who answered. Gu Zhe's voice had a hint of threat. I want to see Lin Cece. Little Red said calmly. Miss Lin is sick and doesn't want to see anyone. I'm Gu Zhe. Gu Zhe's voice was very domineering. It's useless. Little Red snorted and was also very domineering. Gu Zhe looked at the phone. He didn't dial the wrong number. He really doubted how Lin Cece became so famous with such an assistant. It seemed that she didn't know how to behave herself and didn't know how to read people's faces. So he was sure that Lin Cece relied on Chin Mo to provide good resources. After all, he had seen Lin Cece and Chin Mo together. Hearing Little Red's arrogance, Lin Cece's backing must be very powerful. Guzé's voice was gloomy. I'm going to the hospital. Little Red held her phone and was stunned. Then she looked at Lin Cece. Should we fix it? If he wants to come, then let him. Lin Cece closed her eyes. I can't hide from him forever. Little Red nodded and hung up the phone. On the other hand, Guzé didn't go on the same day. Instead, he went on the afternoon of the next day. It was a summer afternoon, and the sun was blazing. Lin Cece's illness was a little better, but she was still wearing a long white nightgown in the air-conditioned room. She stood in front of the window and looked outside. When Guzé came over, she was holding a cup of ginger tea and sipping it with her head lowered. Xiao Hong called out from behind, Cece, Mr. Gu is here. Lin Cece didn't turn around and only said softly, Little Red, I want to drink some milk tea. Go buy me a cup. It has to be hot. The hotter the better. Little Red responded with an oh, and slowly took a few steps back. Then, it looked at Guzé with caution. Guzé's gaze swept over. Little Red shrank when it was swept by a sharp gaze and immediately ran out. There were only the two of them left in the huge VIP ward. Lin Cece looked at Guzé and said weakly, President Gu, if you have anything to say, you can ask your secretary to come and say it. I think it's better for me to say it clearly. Guzé took a few steps forward. When he was only 2 steps away from her, he stopped. Lin Cece was still holding the ginger tea and drinking it casually. He didn't speak and just looked at her with a frown. She covered her body tightly, as if she wanted to sweat on purpose. Why hadn't she recovered? Chapter 31-35. Of course, Guzé wouldn't say that out loud. He pursed his lips and said calmly, Miss Lin, I'm here today to ask why we appeared in the newspapers and the media at the same time. Lin Cece held the ginger tea and sipped it. She said, You have to ask the newspapers and media. Guzé took a step forward. Why would I ask the media? I just want to ask you, did you use me to create hype? He approached her step by step, and Lin Cece retreated step by step until she had nowhere to retreat. Her back was straight against the glass, and he was in front of her. Some of the ginger tea in her hand spilled, and she looked over. Guzé took the cup from her hand, put it aside, and approached her again. Lin Cece's back was against the glass, and she couldn't move any further. She looked at him and smiled. President Gu, you seem to like to flatter yourself. Do I need to use you to create hype? Don't you know whether you do or not? He stroked her face gently with his fingers. Are you doing this to prevent others from causing trouble for you? Or are you trying to create hype? Do you feel that you're past your prime and need to be hyped up again? Lin Cece looked away and smiled. I'm afraid I'll be burnt if I'm tied up with President Gu. Guzé squinted at her. If there's nothing else, President Gu, please leave. I'm a patient and I need a rest. Lin Cece said tiredly. Guzé didn't let her go, and he took another step forward. Miss Lin, I came here today to confirm something. What is it? She looked up at him. Guzé's eyes fell on her face, and then he took 2 steps back, but he was still staring at her. Lin Cece suddenly felt a little uneasy. Sure enough, Guzé whispered, I suspect that Miss Lin took something from my place. I didn't, she said without thinking. He raised his hand, and his eyes fell on her face. He said softly, It's not up to you to decide whether you have it or not. Then he said slowly, A ring I put in the drawer is missing. Did Miss Lin see it? No, Lin Cece said decisively. Guzé smiled. What I'm asking is, did you see it? He was obviously a trap, and Lin Cece would not fall for it. No. Very good. That means I can go back and call the police. The police can also determine whether Miss Lin's fingerprints are on the box. Guzé's voice was cold. Lin Cece's face paled. You know the ring is still inside. Then you have. His voice became stern. Why did you lie just now? She was silent for a while. Then she laughed and said, President Gu, is this interesting? What is the purpose of your visit? Is it to ask me how I felt when I saw the ring? I could tell you right now that I don't feel good. When I saw that ring, I was reminded of how stupid I was in the past. If you like someone, how did you end up being abandoned? Guze's face was ashen as he stared into her eyes. After a long time, he lowered his eyes. You preserved all of her memories. Chapter 31-36. She said it all in one breath, her face as pale as paper. And Guze's face was even more shocked. She said what they couldn't say between them. They were husband and wife, but they lived in the same city as strangers for a few years. She used to rely on him so much, loved him so passionately, and he loved her sincerely. Everything was fleeting. They were both living in self-deception, or perhaps they couldn't face the separation. Therefore, they both hated each other as if they were strangers, not the person they were once close to. Guze looked at her just like that. Lin Cece too. They were only a few steps apart, but it felt like 1,000 mountains and 10,000 rivers. He didn't take a step forward, and she didn't want to either. After a long time, Lin Cece said softly, "Mr. Gu, I will try not to appear in front of you in the future. Also, if you need, I can hold a press conference to clarify things. After all, you have a fiancé." "There's no need," Guze said calmly. Then, he slowly took 2 steps back, preparing to leave. "Mr. Gu," Lin Cece stopped him. "I want to confirm one more thing." Guze stopped. Lin Cece said softly, "Did you find your ring?" Guze's gaze became a little deep, and after a long time, he said softly, "I found it." With that, he walked out in a straight line. Lin Cece looked at him quietly and smiled slightly. She walked over to take the ginger tea she was holding and wanted to take a sip, only to find that it was cold. So she didn't drink it and just stared blankly. When Little Red came back, she held the milk tea and looked at Cece, licking her lips, and said in a low voice, "Cece." She met Guze at the elevator just now, and felt that Guze's face was really ugly. Little Red knew about the relationship between Cece and Guze, so she stuttered and didn't say it out. "Where's the milk tea?" Lin Cece smiled. Little Red handed it over in a daze, and then coughed lightly. "Drink slowly, it's hot." Lin Cece grunted in acknowledgement and took a sip from it. Little Red meowed at the ginger tea. Seeing that it hadn't drunk much, she said indifferently, "I've poured this out. I'll get you a new cup later." Lin Cece smiled and did not stop her. Holding the milk tea in her hands, she stood where she was and looked outside. She wanted to stay at home for a few days after she recovered to accompany her parents. The way she was now was pretty good. At least they would be happier. The corners of Lin Cece's mouth curled up into a bitter smile. How could she not know what Little Red wanted to say? Little Red wanted to ask why she didn't get back together with Guze. Reconcile? How? She did not know, and neither did Guze. "That's it. I'll hide far away and never see him again." Lin Cece gazed into the distance, her eyes a little sore and bitter. A day later, she was discharged from the hospital. Under Chen's coaxing and pestering, she went to stay at her and Lan Yu's house for 2 days, and only left for a city when she was almost recovered. Lin Cece didn't inform them and went straight back to a city. Her parents were very happy, and they really had a few peaceful days together. Lin Cece's parents were living in a 3-story villa, which Lin Cece bought with her own money, and the 2 elders could live in peace. Chapter 31-37. Moreover, Mrs. Lin and the others are spending Cece's money, so they don't need to worry all the time like before. In recent years, Cece has been very popular, and most of the money she earns is given to them. Mrs. Lin has calculated that there are tens of millions of yuan in the bank. Even if Cece doesn't work now, she can live peacefully for the rest of her life. In fact, in Mrs. Lin's heart, she is reluctant to let her go back. The family lives in a city, but because there is Lan Yu and Qin Shun to take care of her in B City, she is a little relieved. But this time, Cece stayed in a city for a week and didn't mention returning to B City. Mrs. Lin is anxious and hopes that she can stay. But she also read the newspaper that Cece met Guze, and something probably happened. Mrs. Lin has very complicated feelings for Guze. At first, she opposed it. How can Cece marry a man like Guzay? Later, both Guzay and she insisted. As a mother, she also wants Cece to be happy, so she agreed. But she didn't expect that she almost couldn't see Cece. She understood and felt sad. She knew that as Guzay's wife, with Cece's background, it must be a secret marriage, but she didn't expect that even parents can't see her. Cece is almost locked up. Mrs. Lin doesn't want her daughter to experience that kind of life anymore. No matter how down they are now, the Lin family used to be at the top, and Cece was almost raised like a princess. Mrs. Lin saw her grievance and almost washed her face with tears all day. But the little fool doesn't know it all. Mrs. Lin loves her daughter and doesn't want her to have contact with Guzay again. But as a mother, she knows that Cece hasn't let go. If Cece lets go, she'll come back. She has been in B City, not for success or for money, but to live in the same city with that man. Mrs. Lin is sad that she is so stubborn. But the child is old, and she can't say it. She is even more afraid that she will be sad. Now is also good. Mrs. Lin makes fruit tea. Cece, come here, this is your favorite. Lin Cece, on the other hand, is holding the phone in a daze for a long time. Madam Lin calls her again before she goes over. He walked over and sat down, saying with a smile, "It smells good." This child is talking nonsense. How can fruit tea have any fragrance? Lin Foreign scolded with a smile, but in her heart, she sighed. In the past, when Cece's father was in a high position, Cece was very willful. Now that her father had fallen, Cece was actually very sensible. Lin Foreign thought about it and felt satisfied. She patted her hand and said, "Go and wash your hands." Madam Lin has always been noble and generous. Although she has lived a hard life for a few years, she still has the habits of a noble. Lin Cece bit her straw and smiled mischievously. "Mom, you're too particular about washing your hands just to drink fruit tea. This is a sense of ritual." Madam Lin smiled, but after a while, she was startled and sighed. "That's right, it's not like before. There's no need to be so troublesome." Lin Cece felt a little lost in her mother's words, so she hugged her mother and said, "Mom, if you like it, let's do it like before. It's not like we're doing it for others to see. It's a ritual." She winked mischievously, then continued to drink the fruit tea. Lin Foreign's heart was a lot more comforted, but when she looked up and saw Cece's little finger, she couldn't help but feel pain in her heart. Chapter 31-38. Lin Foreign faintly smiled. "No, I was just distracted for a moment." Lin Cece didn't believe it. She knew it. She looked down at her fingers and said softly, "It doesn't hurt anymore." Every pain had a story. Cece's story was painful, but Mrs. Lin's heart was even more painful. However, she didn't have the heart to mention it, for fear that Cece would be hurt. Lin Cece hugged her arm and said in a sweet voice, "Mom, can I stay for a few more days this time?" Mrs. Lin looked at her. "Are you willing to leave the world of sensual pleasures?" Lin Cece still smiled sweetly. "Of course I am. Why not? I'm even willing to quit the entertainment industry now." Lin Foreign was reluctant to part with her. She reached out and touched her face. "You decide for yourself. Although I want you to be with me, I hope you can be happy." Lin Cece smiled and hugged Madam Lin's arm. "Mother, don't worry. I will. I'm very happy now." Mrs. Lin smiled and didn't ask any more. They chatted for a while, and Mrs. Lin went to make dinner. Lin Cece was still playing with her phone in the same place. After a long time, Lin Cece closed her eyes and thought of the phone call from Little Red. Little Red said that Guzay had called her and went to the company to look for her. But she didn't know the reason, and neither did Little Red. Lin Cece didn't want to think too much, and she didn't want Guzay to call her. But he hadn't called for so long, so he probably wouldn't call again. In addition, the rumors about her and Guzay on the internet had also been suppressed. She thought it must be Guzay's company that had suppressed them. That's good, she thought silently. Another week passed, and Sister Quan called her in person. She said that there was a commercial shooting in Sea City and that she would leave for the villa in 2 days. Sea City. Lin Cece's heart ached. Sea City, such a distant memory. She almost didn't dare to think about her life in Sea City. It was so short, but it was so deep that it seemed to be engraved in her bones. Lin Cece instinctively refused. However, Sister Quan was a very strict manager, and she knew Cece's problems very well. Cece didn't want to come into contact with Sea City, but the more she didn't, the more Sister Quan would force her. If a person was so weak that he didn't even dare to face his past, then how could he face the rest of his life? It was impossible for him to be happy again. Moreover, Sister Quan received news from the director's team that the villa that was borrowed for the shoot was the one that Guze had bought for Lin Cece. The place was empty, and Guze did not go there again, but the place was well preserved. And the person who borrowed it wasn't Guze, but a doorkeeper. After 2 days of filming, the rent of 200,000 yuan naturally went into the doorman's pocket. However, none of that was important. What Sister Quan wanted was for Cece to face the past. Cece was extremely talented, but she was still lacking something. As for what it was, Sister Quan felt that it was courage, the courage to let go of everything. If he couldn't let it go, how could he go far? Sister Quan then hung up the phone. Lin Cece stared at the phone for a long time before she smiled faintly. Mrs. Lin was preparing dinner. Seeing that she was in a daze, she asked softly, "What are you thinking about?" Lin Cece smiled faintly. "Mom, I have to leave tonight." Mrs. Lin set the dishes and asked in a low voice, "Where are you going?" Chapter 31-39. Mrs. Lin was stunned. After a while, she whispered, "What are you going to do?" "Shoot a commercial. Just 2 days." Lin Cece hugged her and said, "I'll come back to accompany you after the shoot." Mrs. Lin turned around and looked at her little daughter, her heart full of emotions. She and old Lin couldn't help with anything now, but Cece had to take care of them. She felt very sorry, but when a child grew up, she would have to fly eventually. She also knew that if Cece kept hiding, she would never be able to leave. So it was good to go to Sea City. At least she could face it. Mrs. Lin didn't say anything and just patted her. After Lin Cece finished dinner, Mrs. Lin helped her pack her luggage. When she went upstairs to get her luggage, Mrs. Lin immediately turned her face away and said in a hoarse voice, "Ask your father to send you to the airport. Call me when you arrive in Sea City. Be careful staying in a hotel alone at night." Every time Cece went out, she would tell her like this. Lin Cece heard a lot, but she didn't get tired of it. She just hugged Mrs. Lin and said, "Mom, I'm not a child anymore. I can take care of myself." Of course, Mrs. Lin knew that, but no matter how much her child grew up, she would still think of herself as a child. Mr. Lin also went upstairs to carry Lin Cece's luggage. Mrs. Lin checked her ID again and then sent her to the door. Mr. Lin hadn't driven for a long time, so he called a taxi and sent Lin Cece to the airport. After taking the luggage and the ticket, Lin Cece turned around. "Dad, you should go back now. The car is still waiting." Mr. Lin looked at his little daughter and didn't say anything. He just reached out and stroked her hair. "Go to the security check. Don't be late." Lin Cece nodded and watched him leave before going in. Only an hour later, the plane landed in Sea City. The cruise car had already come to pick them up, and they checked into the MG Hotel in Sea City. It was 11 o'clock at night, and Lin Cece couldn't sleep because she had to read the script tomorrow. It was a well-known watch brand, and her partner was also a well-known male star in the circle or at the level of an artist. More importantly, he was single, and there was no psychological pressure to act with such a partner. A little scandal would only make him popular, and there would be no negative impact. She leaned against the headboard alone, reading those difficult scripts. She was successful. She was famous not only because of her talent, but also because of her hard work. She used to be a rice worm, but when she left that person, she told herself that she was no longer qualified to be a rice worm, and that she could only rely on herself. Guze could give up on her, but she could not give up on her parents. She tried hard to live. Even if it was only a small happiness, she also tried hard to live. At 2 o'clock in the morning, she finally put down the script in her hands, took a shower, and went to sleep. But how could he fall asleep? This was Sea City. This place was filled with a familiar smell. Familiar and painful. Of course, she couldn't sleep. When she really fell asleep, it was already 4 in the morning, but but she had to leave for the filming location at 6 to put on makeup. At 5:50, she woke up on time. When she sat up, she heard a knock on the door. She knew it was Little Red, so she yawned and went to open the door. When the door opened, she froze. It wasn't Little Red, but Lynn Cece's face was pale. She softly uttered 2 words, "Auntie." The person in front of her, who was wearing a cleaning uniform, was the Annie who took care of her in Sea City. Chapter 3140. The auntie also recognized her and was stunned for a long time. Then, unexpectedly, hot tears fell down. Lynn Cece was stunned and quickly asked, "Auntie, what's wrong? What happened?" Auntie Lee wiped her tears and said, "Nothing happened. I'm just happy to see you like this." Lynn Cece knew that it wasn't that simple. The Annie had a good personality and was very capable. If it wasn't for the accident, she wouldn't have come to the hotel to work as a cleaner. She remembered that the Annie always told her that her daughter had a promising future abroad. Thinking of this, she looked around and pulled Auntie Lee into the room. Obviously, the Annie was still a little nervous and didn't say anything for a long time. Lynn Cece sighed and said, "Auntie, don't hide anything from me. Although I'm not good now, I can still help with some things." The Annie sighed and said in a choked voice, "Cece, I'm really embarrassed to say it out loud." Lynn Cece helped her to sit down and took her cleaning tools to the side. Then, she personally poured a glass of warm water and said, "Drink some water and talk slowly." The auntie held the glass, and a trace of fear appeared on her face. After a long time, the auntie said in a trembling voice, "They said that my daughter killed someone in the United States, and they locked her in prison. But I know my daughter best. She can't even bear to kill a chicken. How can she bear to kill someone?" As she said that, she couldn't help but burst into tears. Originally, she had a good family. Although it wasn't very rich, her children were successful, and she had a pension. It was supposed to be peaceful and beautiful. How could she know that the sky would suddenly fall? As the auntie cried, Cece kept patting her back and comforting her. Finally, the auntie stopped crying and said, "My old man and I even sold our house to hire a good lawyer for our daughter's lawsuit. But that was in the United States. Those lawyers are calculated by the second. In the end, we spent millions and only hired a liar." Lynn Cece felt sad and let out a long breath. "Annie, I can help you hire a lawyer. Don't cry." She comforted her and helped wipe her tears. In a trance, the auntie felt like her daughter was by her side. She couldn't help but bury herself in Cece's arms and cry. Lynn Cece could understand her feelings. Back then, she and Sister Chun were also bullied in the United States. There was so much helplessness and pain. She had never regretted it. Sister Chun had sacrificed her life for so many people, and she had nothing to regret for Sister Chun. Now that her daughter is in prison abroad, she must be as sad and anxious as her mother was at that time. She gently caressed the auntie's white hair and said softly, "Auntie, don't be anxious. I'll be shooting an advertisement these 2 days. You should quit your job here first and then come back to H City with me. I'll find you a good lawyer. Let's not fight foreign devils. We'll find a big lawyer, the most famous kind. When the time comes, I'll bring you to America to fight a lawsuit." The auntie's body trembled. After more than half a year, she thought that she and her daughter were going to be separated forever. Who knew that there would be light at the end of the tunnel? She stared blankly for a long time before saying in a trembling voice, "Cece, are you serious?" Then he was at a loss. He stroked his hair and said, "But I—" Chapter 3141. The auntie was excited again, but she still felt uneasy. Although she had taken care of Cece for a few months, she had received Mr. Goo's money for her work. How could she accept such a big favor? Although her heart was filled with desire, she still spoke with a trembling voice. "That's not very appropriate, and we don't have the ability to repay you." She had gone to see her daughter. Although she was fine, she was crippled. After squatting in there for half a year, his entire person was unrecognizable. It would probably be difficult for him to stand up again. Therefore, Auntie Lee's voice trembled, and she still refused with extreme heartache. "I'll think of another way myself." "Annie, what can you think of?" Lynn Cece whispered. "If you could, you wouldn't be here. This may sound offensive, but it's the truth. The auntie was sad, but she couldn't help but feel hopeful. At that moment, the door opened with a bang, followed by Little Red's voice. "Cece, are you awake?" Just as he finished speaking, Little Red, who was standing at the door, opened her mouth in surprise. Who was this? Lynn Cece knew what she was thinking. She stood up and said, "This is a distant relative of mine. I'm going to shoot a commercial in a while. Take her to the hotel to resign and help her tidy up. She can stay at my place tonight. After the commercial is over, I'll take her back to H-City." Little Red was still in a daze. After a while, she said, "Sister Kwan said that you shouldn't bring too much luggage." Cece loved to buy gadgets. Every time she went out of town to film, she would take the time to go shopping and bring back 2 large bags of things. Sister Kwan had already warned her about this wasteful habit, but there was nothing she could do about it. But this time, Cece wanted to bring back a person, and it looked like trouble. Little Red coughed lightly. "Well, I'll go ask Sister Kwan." As he spoke, he turned to leave. "Stop." Lynn Cece's voice was a little harsh. "Little Red, if you dare tell Sister Kwan, I'll fire you immediately." Little Red stopped and turned around with a bitter expression on her face. "Cece, you're going to make me get scolded to death by Sister Kwan. If you tell her, I will scold you to death. Choose one." Lin Cece threatened directly. Xiaohong's face was bitter as she glared at her. After a long while, she finally said, "Don't do it again." Lin Cece smiled. "Good boy, give me a kiss. I'll treat you to barbecue tonight." Little Red rolled her eyes. "Can't I choose a feast? Every time, it's a kebab, a worthless kebab. If you work hard, you'll have a feast." Lin Cece walked over and knocked her on the head. "Remember, don't tell Sister Kwan. Also, help me adjust my schedule secretly. After shooting this commercial, I don't want to work for the next 3 months." As soon as he finished speaking, Little Red shrieked, "3 months." She poked Lin Cece with her finger. Do you know how long the shelf life of the entertainment industry is? How dare you not work for 3 months? Do you want to quit the entertainment industry? It's not a big deal if I'm not popular anymore. Lin Cece shrugged. Little Red was stunned at first, and then her eyes turned red. "You make it sound so easy. Don't you need money? Also, you quit just like that. What do you take us for? Don't you have any nostalgia?" Sister Kwan is right. Lin Cece, you're an ingrate. Lin Cece blinked. "But I know that Little Red has the softest heart." Chapter 3142. As Little Red spoke, she glanced at the auntie and lowered her voice. "Is there trouble? I think you could talk to Sister Kwan. She has a lot of connections. If not, you could talk to Boss Lon and Sister Chinchin. They both love you." Lin Cece knew all this, but she couldn't trouble them. The auntie was taking care of her, so was her own business. So she shook her head and smiled. "It's not a big trouble." Little Red gave her a meaningful look. 1 month at most, or Sister Kwan won't agree. Lin Cece looked at the auntie and thought about what Little Red said. She felt that it was reasonable, so she acquiesced. 1 month. Little Red left with the auntie and told Lin Cece not to be late. After they left, Lin Cece was lost in thought. She had to take care of the auntie's daughter's case, but she really didn't know the depth. Little Red's concerns were right. Thinking of this, she couldn't help but want to smoke. At least, she lit a cigarette to calm herself down. After lighting a cigarette, she didn't have time to eat breakfast, so she went straight to the first floor. This time, the advertisement was for a big brand, so the budget was more than enough. There were dozens of crew members, and they drove to the rented villa. As the female lead, Lin Cece and the male lead, Yi Mubai, were in the same car. She knew the senior, but she wasn't familiar with him, so she didn't take the initiative to talk to him. They just slept separately. The car was shaking, but it was very comfortable. She felt that she had only slept for a while before she arrived at the set. However, when she opened her eyes and saw the villa with the black carved door, her face suddenly turned pale and her blood seemed to freeze. She wanted to speak, but her throat couldn't make a sound. Her face was deathly pale as she stared at the place where she used to live, as if she had seen a ghost. Yi Mubai frowned, looked at the villa in front of him, and then turned to look at the girl next to him. "What's wrong?" Lin Cece immediately grabbed his arm and looked at him for a long time. After a long time, she squeezed out a voice. Tell the director that I don't want to shoot here. I don't want to shoot here. Her voice was almost hysterical. Yimu Bai's frown deepened, but he went straight to the point. Have you been here before? No. Lin Cece immediately denied. After saying that, she calmed down and turned to look at the villa again. Everything was the same as before, but the people had changed. There was a misty look in her eyes, as well as a hint of pain. Yimu Bai looked at her, suddenly opened the car door, got out, and walked towards the director who was already standing outside. He whispered a few words, and the director looked at him, puzzled. Then he glanced at Lin Cece. Are you sure? We're only renting for 2 days, and the itinerary is already set. Mubai, will you have any problems? Yimu Bai smiled. What should I do? My heart softens when I see a young and beautiful girl sad. The director had a good relationship with him, so he told him the truth. Just enjoy it for a while. This person and President Qi might. Do you understand? Yimu Bai was still smiling and patted the director's shoulder. Have you ever seen me make a mistake? You're a little girl. You're so adorable. Chapter 31:43. With that, the director agreed. All right, let's start with the set and see if that lady is in the mood. If she really isn't, we'll do it tomorrow. I'm fine with it, but I'm afraid you won't be able to make it. Yimu Bai smiled. All right, thank you. The director glanced at him. Old Bai, we've been friends for so many years. Don't. I'm still hoping to go the fresh meat route. Don't call me old Bai in front of others. It won't be good if the fans hear it. Yimu Bai adjusted his clothes. The director laughed. Come on, old Bai. Others might not know you, but I know you. Fresh meat? You're just an old piece of cured meat. Yimu Bai didn't mind and took out 2 cigarettes, one for each of them. The director looked at him as he smoked. Why do you pretend to be like this in front of others, saying that smoking is bad for your health, but in private, you're a heavy smoker? Aren't you tired of living such a hypocritical life? Yimu Bai raised his head and let out a long puff of smoke, glancing at him. The fans like me. Are you not convinced? Director Chung laughed and patted his shoulder. Good, good, good. You're polite. He reached out and flicked the cigarette, but, old Bai, you've been spoiled by your fans. You have such a bad temper. With that said, he went to direct the crew to set up the set. His voice was so loud. Who said he wasn't spoiling old Bai just now? Yimu Bai held the cigarette and chuckled. Then, he wanted to go back and talk to Lin Cece. He really felt sorry for this little girl. She was small and thin, but there were so many stories in her eyes. But the moment he turned around, he saw Lin Cece standing behind him. He was stunned for a moment, then smiled. How long have you been here? Not long, when I heard the director say that you've been spoiled by your fans. Lin Cece smiled. Yimu Bai looked around as if he was holding back something, but in the end, he couldn't help but laugh. I wanted to tell you that if you're not feeling well, we can film tomorrow, but I don't think that's necessary. Lin Cece looked at him and smiled. Thank you. Yimu Bai shook her hand with the hand holding the cigarette. You're welcome. Pausing for a moment, he said, Shall we split up and go to the dressing room? Okay. Lin Cece said goodbye to him with a smile and went to the dressing room. The director came back and looked at Lin Cece. She's better now. She's not throwing a tantrum anymore. Then he looked at Yimu Bai. Old Bai, how did you coax him? I didn't see you having such power in the past. Come on, it's not easy for a little girl. I'm going to put on some makeup. Yimu Bai smiled and left. The director snorted. You don't need makeup with that kind of foundation. You just want to be a little fresh meat all day long. After he finished complaining, the director gave him a few more cigarettes. Yimu Bai then came out. Just as the director had said, it was best for a man of his age not to put on makeup. He just changed his clothes and combed his hair. He came out and stood in front of the director. Give me a cigarette. Do you think it's appropriate for you to smoke while dressed like that? You're acting as a noble character now. Don't ruin your image. The director snorted. Yimu Bai laughed. I've said it before. That's just acting. It's for the fans to see. Can't I live if I don't smoke? As he said that, he grabbed a cigarette. At that moment, Lin Cece came out. Yimu Bai didn't light his cigarette and walked towards the female lead. Chapter 3144. Yimu Bai was wearing a light beige suit with a pair of cropped pants, which perfectly displayed his 182 centimeters height and gentle temperament. Lin Cece, on the other hand, was wearing a white dress that was very textured. Both of them were wearing watches of the same brand on their wrists. Yimu Bai walks over and holds her hand naturally. From now on, we're all going to get into the roles. Please forgive me if I offended you. Lin Cece is a little flattered by his gentlemanly behavior, because Yimu Bai is very famous and has never had any scandals. The only thing he has ever had is that he is a mistress of a rich woman in her early 50s. However, it is also groundless, and no one has ever filmed anything. Lin Cece is distracted for a while, and her eyes fall on his hand holding hers. Yimu Bai's hand is very white, and the joints are very clear and beautiful. She can tell that he has been living a good life since he was a child. Lin Cece doesn't think too much and looks up at the villa in front of her. It has been a few years, and things have changed. In the past, she was raised here as a pet, not the hostess. But today, she is going to play the hostess here. She feels very funny. At this time, the director says to the assistant on the side, "I see that there is a swimming pool in the back. Ask someone to clean it, and we will add a swimming pool scene." Yimu Bai and Lin Cece both hear it. Lin Cece is the first to object. That swimming pool is too big. It will take half a day just to let the water out. After she says that, the director waves his hand indifferently. "We have spent hundreds of thousands of yuan. It is nothing to waste some water. Xiao Zhang, let the water out." But Yimu Bai catches the meaning of Lin Cece's words and frowns. "Have you been here before?" Lin Cece is stunned, and then smiles weakly. Yes. She doesn't want to explain, and Yimu Bai doesn't want to force her. Without saying anything more, they go to the backyard to see the water. This villa is very big. In addition to a big swimming pool in the back, there's also a big garden. Seeing that the director is not in a hurry to shoot, Yimu Bai smiles and says to Lin Cece, "Let's go to the garden and have a look. Maybe there is a place where we can take some photos." Lin Cece nods. In fact, she would rather walk around outside than enter the villa. There were too many memories in that house. She clearly wanted to forget it, but every minute and second was so vivid in her memory that she couldn't forget it even if she wanted to. Yimu Bai was a very good companion. When he walked with her, he would care about the feelings of a lady. Moreover, this kind of demeanor wasn't fake, it was an innate good temperament. Lin Cece was also very relaxed when she was with him. It was probably because he was more tolerant towards girls at his age. The two of them chatted for quite a while and went around to several small gardens. The flowers were blooming well, but the last place they went to was a little desolate. There was only a small mound of soil in such a big place. Lin Cece stared at it and slowly walked over. Finally, she stood at that place and saw a simple tombstone with a few words written on it. Her face instantly paled. "My wife is a fool." She could barely stand. Her body was swaying, and her head was spinning. Everything in front of her was black. The blue sky above them seemed to have darkened. One moment it was white, the next moment it was black. She desperately wanted to wake herself up, but in the end, she still fainted. Then she fainted in Yimu Bai's arms. Yimu Bai looked at the simple, small mound of soil, and then looked at the person in his arms. He comprehended it in an instant. The people here, everything here is related to Lin Cece. Maybe she used to be the owner of this place. Chapter 3145. When she woke up again, the sky was bright and the surroundings were quiet. Lin Cece blinked and looked at the familiar yet strange ceiling. Her voice was very soft. "Where are you? What time is it?" An elegant voice was heard. "You're awake." Then came the sound of footsteps. The footsteps were very slow, and the person walked to the bed and slowly squatted down. Yimu Bai entered Lin Cece's line of sight. She stared at him blankly, then turned her face away and looked at everything around her. Everything was the same as before, but the people had changed, especially the photo of her and Guze on the bedside table. At that time, Cece had a silly and sweet smile, and her two small fangs were particularly cute. She was wearing a floral skirt, and Guze was wearing a simple white shirt. The background was the sofa in the living room of the villa. Guze was sitting on it, and she was sitting in Guze's arms. Her little chin was resting on Guze's shoulder. In her eyes, there was the look that should be in love instead of the dull look that she had now. Yimubai squatted down and said slowly, "In the bedroom on the second floor, the doorman saw you and said that he knew you, so he opened the door upstairs. Also, you fainted for 2 hours. The doctor came and said that you were fine, but you were too emotional." Lin Cece was still looking at him. She was wearing makeup, but now the makeup was a little off, and there was a patch under her eyes. It could be seen that she had cried in her sleep. Why did she cry? Maybe it was because the smell here was too familiar, and it hurt too much. "I remember, but I can't walk yet. Can you carry me down?" Her big eyes had a hurt look like that of a small animal, and she asked in a low voice. Yimubai's heart softened, and he agreed. He reached out and carried her. The moment he carried her, he noticed that Lin Cece's eyes swept over the photo on the bedside table, but she quickly looked away. When they went downstairs, she pursed her lips. "I'm much better, thank you." Yimubai smiled and placed her on the sofa. He personally poured her a glass of warm water and handed it to her. The director was taken aback by Yimubai's behavior. He quietly pulled Yimubai aside and said, "Old Bai, are you serious? Do you really want to touch this chick? Have you thought about whether your family would agree? Even if they agree, there's still a Chin Mo standing in the way. Chin Mo is married. It has nothing to do with her. It's purely a publicity stunt." Yimubai smiled and patted the director. "Director Chung, do you still believe in this? But what about Guze? Don't tell me you don't know she's Guze's ex-wife. This villa is filled with her shadow. Tell me, do you think a divorced man who keeps a mansion worth tens of millions to commemorate his ex-wife without any feelings?" Director Chung patted him again and said meaningfully, "Old Bai, we've known each other for so many years, and you've always been untouchable. I've always thought that you're immune to women, but this time I have to warn you, it's better to stay away from this girl. It's not that she's not good, but she's too troublesome." After saying that, he looked at Yimubai with a burning gaze. Yes, do you understand?" Yimubai smiled, took out a cigarette, and looked at old Chung. "I understand what you're saying, but it seems that I can't escape." As he said that, he covered his chest with one hand. "It's beating very hard here. I need a girl to lean on me." Director Chung screamed, "Then I'll get someone to find a good girl for you to lean on tonight. You can't do anything stupid, okay?" Chapter 3146. Yimubai just smiled, lit the cigarette, and took a long drag. After smoking a cigarette, he walked over and sat opposite Lin Cece, which was also the place where the photo was taken. "Do you feel better?" Lin Cece held the cup, looked at him, and smiled. "Much better. Thank you." Then she tilted her head. "Your face may not look good. Lao Bai, did you paint it like a yiksha?" She called him Lao Bai naturally, and Yimubai keenly noticed it. She probably wanted to be like Director Chung and be good friends with him. But it was a friend that had nothing to do with gender. The little girl was quite interesting. She knew that he had a bad idea about her, so she took the initiative to get the upper hand. He didn't care. Chasing a girl required patience. It was not something that could be done in a day or a month. He was a slow learner, and it was not until he fell in love with a girl in his 30s that he naturally had to treat her with care. Yimubai smiled slightly, and his eyes were full of the aura of a mature man. His carelessness was really noble, which made people feel that he came from a very good family and didn't seem to be in the entertainment circle. Lin Cece asked him, and he answered skillfully, "How can you belittle yourself like that? You just need to touch up your makeup. Do you have the strength to shoot now? I'm in a hurry." Lin Cece couldn't help apologizing. "I'm sorry for holding you up. I'm in a hurry because I want to finish early tonight and treat you to something delicious." Yimubai habitually held a cigarette in his mouth and stood up slowly. "But you have to pay the bill." Lin Cece was on guard against him, or she wouldn't call him Lao Bai. But since he was so impolite, she felt relaxed. "Okay, I don't mind, but I have to take 2 people with me." "Okay, I'll protect you." Yimubai's words had a double meaning, and Lin Cece also smiled. She leaned her face toward him. Lao Bai, do you think I need someone to protect me now? Yi Mubai was stunned for a moment. He probably didn't expect that she would lean toward him. After a while, he smiled lightly again. Girls all need protection. With that, he reached out and touched her little head. This time, it was Lin Cece's turn to stiffen. Because in the past, when she was a little fool, there were also people who did the same to her. That person thought that she was very cute. That person married her, but in his heart, he still thought that she was silly. Her eyes were moist. It was hard to notice, but it was still noticed by Yi Mubai. He smiled and said, "You are so sentimental. I told you that girls need to be protected." Lin Cece blinked away the tears in her eyes and smiled lightly. "Thank you, old Bai. If you want to thank me, bring more money tonight. I can eat a lot." Yi Mubai was still smiling lightly. He wasn't a person who liked to smile, but when he was with her, he seemed to be smiling all the time. Perhaps it was because of the characteristics of a straight man. When he met a girl he liked, he unconsciously wanted to present his best side in front of her. Even though he was in his 30s, he still had desires and wanted to hug the girl he liked. However, he had to take it slow. If he was too fast, he would scare her. While Yi Mubai was thinking, 2 hours ago, the guard here called Guze. Chapter 31:47. On the other side, Guze was holding his phone and his face was livid. "President Gu, what's wrong?" Su Qiaonan asked with concern. Guze put down his phone and looked at the senior management in the meeting room. He said calmly, "Vice President Li will take over the meeting." With that, he strode towards the door. Su Qiaonan followed him hurriedly. "President Gu, what happened? Shall I go with you?" Guze paused and looked at her. "Secretary Su, I don't want you to interfere in my personal affairs. Do you understand? Just do your job well." Su Qiaonan's face turned red and white. After a while, she said in a low voice, "I understand, President Gu. I'm sorry." Guze glanced at her and turned to leave. Su Qiaonan stood where she was and looked embarrassed. After a long time, she made a call. Guze arrived in Sea City 2 hours later. When the car stopped, he was covered in dust and anger. The guard at the door was so scared that he wet his pants. He made the call because he knew that the crew was going to release a press release to hype up Yi Mubai and Lin Cece. Sooner or later, they would be exposed, so he told Mr. Gu everything. Guze's car stopped, and the guard wanted to plead for mercy. However, Guze slammed the car door and pursed his lips. "Where is she?" The guard was so scared that he wet his pants. He let him inside. "She has woken up and is filming." "Mr. Gu, I didn't do it on purpose. It's because someone in my family is sick and I need some money urgently." So Guze interrupted him impatiently. "Where is she?" "In the hall," the guard said softly and peeked at Mr. Gu's expression. It was really ugly. He was scared, but he had to accompany him. Guze walked straight to the hall. His aura was so sharp that it could freeze 3 feet. When he reached the entrance of the hall, he looked at the guard. The guard had a bitter expression and gently pushed the door open. The door opened slowly. The inside and outside were 2 different worlds, but now they became one. In the familiar hall, his ex-wife and another man were hugging and kissing in front of the camera. The scene was beautiful, truly beautiful. She put her hand on Yi Mubai's shoulder, stood on tiptoe, and moved closer to Yi Mubai's delicate lips. The director's voice was very flat as he requested, "Lao Bai, open your lips slightly. Suck in a little. Don't make it so rigid. It doesn't look like it." Then, Guze saw that Lin Cece's lips were gently sucked on by Yi Mubai, and Yi Mubai's arm was slightly tightened, his large palm flat on her waist, slightly supporting her. He treasured her very much. Those soft lips touched and pressed against each other bit by bit. It wasn't very alluring and hot, but it was beautiful and real. It wasn't a fake kiss or a fake one, but a real kiss. Yi Mubai's Adam's apple even moved slightly, and his skin was slightly puckered. That was a sign that only a man would have when he was aroused. However, he only sucked on one part of his lips and nothing more. They kept kissing as if they were going to kiss until the end of time. Guze's fingers slowly clenched, and he stared at them. If looks could kill, Yi Mubai and Lin Cixi would be dead at this moment. Under such gazes, the director was very satisfied with the shooting. He repeatedly wanted to make adjustments, and then he rushed to the door angrily. Who's blind? Close the door, the light is gone. Everyone's eyes looked towards the door, including Yi Mubai and Lin Cixi, who were hugging. Chapter 31:48. Guze stood at the door, watching Yi Mubai and Lin Cixi hugging each other. His eyes were straight, and his emotions couldn't be seen clearly. However, the director saw him clearly and smiled awkwardly. It's President Gu. Are you here for holiday? In fact, he knew clearly that this villa probably belonged to the King of Hell. Little Sun didn't lend it to anyone, but he borrowed it from Guze. Now that he was here, how was he going to clean up the mess? Guze acted as if he didn't hear it. His eyes fell straight on Lin Cixi's face, and he walked straight towards her. Yi Mubai blocked in front of Lin Cixi without a trace. Guze, Mubai, get out of the way. Guze pushed Yi Mubai aside. Yi Mubai could have been rough, but something flashed through his mind, and he quietly stepped aside. Some roads can never be crossed if you don't take them. So he stepped aside. Guze walked all the way to Lin Cixi and stared at her. She didn't avoid him. They looked at each other for a long time, and Guze said softly, Director Chung, I want to say a few words to Miss Lin alone. Is that okay? Of course, of course. Director Chung laughed and left with his people. This is your territory. Who dares to say no? Guze was still looking at Lin Cixi. When everyone left, he said, I thought you would never come. I also thought you would always escape from reality. Lin Cixi raised her head and looked at Guze. I didn't know what happened today. If I knew, I wouldn't have come. Now, if you don't want to rent it to the crew, I will explain to Director Chung. Guze didn't answer and kept looking at her. She dressed very innocently today. No, her appearance had always been innocent, unlike her heart, which had so many thoughts. Guze didn't speak. She became a little nervous and lowered her eyes. Sorry, I'm not what you think. After saying that, she rubbed her forehead. Guze, if you want me to apologize, I will apologize for the past. He looked at her, but the corners of his mouth held a hint of a smile. Why are you apologizing? Is it because of the villa? Or was it because of Mubai? Lin Cixi looked up and noticed that he had called her Mubai. Guze's lips curled into a cold smile. Mubai's family isn't that simple. Don't think that you can be with him after leaving me. It'll be even harder for him to marry you than it was for me. Don't bring up the past. Lin Cixi raised her head, and there was a tinge of heat in her eyes. Don't marry me if it's difficult. No one is forcing you to marry me. Guze, you bastard. Fine, you don't want me. You abandoned me. I took revenge on you. So what? You didn't lose anything. What else do you want now? She didn't cry. Instead, she asked sarcastically, is it because President Gu feels uncomfortable seeing me kiss someone else? She said that in one breath, but she didn't expect that he would agree. Yes, I feel uncomfortable. Lin Cixi, I feel very uncomfortable. As Guze said that, he took a few steps forward and gritted his teeth. I don't care how many men you are with, but Lin Cixi, don't come here. After saying that, he spat out a word. Get lost. Her body trembled. She heard his even colder voice. Get lost immediately. Take your Director Chung and your Yi Mubai. Get out of here. Lin Cixi lowered her head. After a while, she only said one word. Okay. She didn't know how she walked out. As soon as she walked out, she saw Director Chung smoking heavily. He seemed to be very distressed. She said softly, Can I borrow another villa? I can't talk to President Gu. Chapter 31:49. In the end, Lin Cixi borrowed a nearby villa belonging to Lan Yu and Qin Shun. After the phone call, she confirmed with Director Chung. Director Chung patted her shoulder again. It's not your fault. In the end, it's because our crew didn't do a good job. Anyway, we can't finish today. Drive the car over, and I'll let them set up the scenery. How about the three of us go for a drink? Take it as a way to relax. Oh, and I'm talking about Old Bai. Originally, Director Chung didn't think Old Bai and the young girl would work together. However, he thought that Old Bai liked Lin Cixi and would probably talk to her. Sigh, Such a beautiful young girl. Even he was a bit protective of her. Being in this industry, he could see clearly that other than Lin Cece's relationship with King Entertainment's Chin and Mo, she didn't have any unspoken rules with anyone else. With that said, Lin Cece refused. If that's the case, Director Chung, I happen to meet a very important person today, Guze. Director Chung didn't think too much and blurted out. Lin Cece was dazed for a moment and then smiled lightly. No, it's an aunt who used to take care of me. Something happened to her family. It's quite troublesome. Director Chung looked at her with concern. Lin Cece could only say, her daughter has a lawsuit in America. She's looking for Old Bai. He has a big lawyer in his family, and Old Bai. Before Director Chung could finish, he saw Yimu Bai and Guze walk out together. He said in a low voice, they know each other for many years. Cece, you know what I mean. If she didn't want to get involved with Guze, she should keep her distance from Old Bai. Lin Cece had been in the entertainment industry for a few years. How could she not know? So she smiled lightly. I know. Director Chung was relieved and then called Yimu Bai. Old Bai, come here. Yimu Bai walked over. Director Chung had just said that they wouldn't be shooting in the afternoon. He took out 2 cigarettes and smiled faintly. Then I'll catch up with Guze. Old Bai, you. Director Chung shook his head. Yimu Bai patted Director Cheng's shoulder, his gaze deep. Therefore, Director Chung knew in his heart that Lao Bai really had an idea, and he didn't want him to get involved in this matter. If it was in the past, Director Chung would have jumped up and scolded Guze. She grew up with Guze, so how could he want his ex-wife? However, Director Chung had known Yimu Bai for many years, and it wasn't easy for him to fall in love, sigh. Director Chung didn't say anything. He just sighed. You guys go first, I'll follow the crew tomorrow. Yimu Bai smiled and looked at Lin Cece. See you tomorrow. He raised his hand as if he wanted to rub her hair, but he didn't. He just smiled and retracted his hand. He was so warm that Lin Cece couldn't reject him. She smiled and said, thank you for today. I didn't help, Yimu Bai said, and turned to look at Guze. Let's go. Guze's expression had recovered a little, and he became a little lazy. He didn't look at Lin Cece and left with Yimu Bai. From the beginning to the end, Yimu Bai didn't say anything about him interceding, but Guze didn't agree. When they arrived at a Chinese restaurant, it was already past 1 o'clock in the afternoon. After struggling for a long time, they were really hungry. Both men had their own thoughts, so they casually ate a little and then slowly drank the wine. White. Chapter 3150. Guze was flicking the ash off his cigarette. His fingers trembled slightly, and then his movements froze there. Old Bai. His voice was a little hoarse. Are you sure? Yimu Bai smiled. I'm sure. I like her. You know that I've never liked a woman. You haven't liked her, but it doesn't mean that you haven't. Guze's voice was still stiff. You know that she is my ex-wife, but you still want to get involved? Do you want to remarry her? Yimu Bai asked very seriously. Guze shook his head without hesitation. Yimu Bai smiled lightly. If not, why can't I? Or because you still love her? Guze didn't say anything. He just lit the cigarette between his fingers and kept looking at Yimu Bai. After a long time, he said softly, up to you. After that, he took out a few $100 bills from his wallet and put them on the table. Then he got up and left. Yimu Bai sat there and smiled faintly. Don't love? How could it be? Guze drove his car back. It was early autumn. He opened the car window and let the wind blow into the car, but it couldn't blow away the heat in his head. His mind was full of Yimu Bai's words. Guze, if you don't want her, I'm going to chase her. Chase her. Old Bai shouldn't be asking about her. But Chin Mo, Guze braked suddenly. He held the steering wheel with both hands and closed his eyes tightly. His originally strong facial features turned into the sharpest lines, and the momentum was enough to make anyone disappear in an instant. After a long time, the lines slowly calmed down. Guze opened his eyes and looked at the road ahead. The sky was gray, and it was the same color as the road, the same color as his mood. He sat quietly. He didn't know how long it took before he started the car again. When he returned to the villa, everyone had left. The villa returned to a dead silence. Guze's car drove in and stopped. He opened the door, got off, and slowly walked into the villa. He hadn't been here for several years. Ever since he left that day, he had never stepped into it. Now, it had returned to its original appearance. Every ornament was placed there by the little fool. The little fool said that this was their home. Home should have the smell of home. On the coffee table in front of the sofa, there was a group of selfies of the little fool. Every single one of them was lively and infectious. He picked it up and slowly sat down on the sofa. After a long time, he said in a low voice, "Have you been disturbed?" Of course, the person in the photo wouldn't answer him. She just smiled. Guze smiled bitterly. "Little fool, Olbai said that he wants to pursue her and be with her. Do you agree?" He stared at her for a long time before he chuckled softly. "You will definitely ask if Olbai will bring her to grill skewers or take her to see pigeons, right?" "Yes. Olbai loves little girls very much, and he's very nice." As Guze spoke, a large tear suddenly fell from the corner of his eye. A whole pellet fell on the back of his hand. Almost burning him, he covered his eyes with one hand and slowly leaned towards the back of the sofa, sinking deep into it. After a long time, he murmured, "Olbai will be with her, and I will be with you. All right?" The person in the photo was still smiling. Guze suddenly went crazy. He smashed the photo in his hand against the wall, his voice sounding like it was about to rip his lungs out. "Why aren't you talking? Do you still hate me? Why won't you come back?" His chest heaved up and down as he looked at the broken pieces on the floor. It was just like the broken feelings between him and the little fool. It was just like that day, and it was just like the hurt in her eyes. Suddenly, he covered his eyes and murmured, "Come back, all right?" Chapter 31:51. However, it was quiet around him. No one could answer him. Guze's body fell onto the sofa behind him. He didn't care about the broken glass on the sofa. He let the sharp things pierce his arm and leave dark red blood on his white shirt. He raised his arm gently and smiled softly. This was like the last mark Cece had left on his mirror. Guze sat on the sofa and panted silently. After a long time, he walked to the bar and took out a bottle of red wine. He didn't take a glass and just drank it. From day to night, he drank a few bottles of red wine. When night fell, he staggered to the back courtyard. Under the moonlight, the small mound was shrouded in moonlight and had a faint glow. Guze walked over and knelt down on the ground. He half knelt down and raised his eyes. He stared at the small wooden sign with his half-drunk eyes. He smiled, but there was a glimmer of light in the corner of his eyes under the moonlight. His fingers gently stroked the wooden sign, and he said softly, "It's been a few years. How have you been? Did they disturb you? What about me? Did I disturb you? Are you unhappy that I'm here?" There was silence around him. No one could answer him. Guze closed his eyes and sat there. His body leaned against the small mound, just like how he had sat side by side with the little fool. He looked up at the night sky and seemed to hear her say, "Guze, I want to eat skewers. Can you take me there?" One night in Sea City, he came over. He hadn't seen her for 2 weeks. He wanted her, but the little fool stood in front of him and said those words. Of course, he could have ignored her, but her eyes were so bright and her expression was so happy, as if he could do anything for her. So that night, he spent 2 hours with her to eat skewers. That was the only time he took her out in the first few months of their marriage. The little fool was extremely happy. He looked around everywhere and simply didn't want to go home. However, Guze missed the bed at home. He quickly coaxed her to go home. On that super big bed, he vented all of his desire for the past 2 weeks. He tried all of the things he didn't dare to do on her in the past. The little fool was bullied badly by him, but she did not push him away no matter how much she cried. Instead, she hugged his neck as she cried. Her whole body was burning hot. How silly. Guze chuckled. How can there be such a silly person? He sat quietly, stretched out his hand, and gently patted the small mound, just like he did with the little fool. He spoke to the small wooden sign. "Lao Bai's a very good person. He treats girls very well. If it were you, would you be with him?" Of course, no one could answer him. Guze laughed again. It was a sad laugh. "You wouldn't because you're so silly." But Lin Cece would. Guze knew that as long as Lao Bai was willing to warm up a girl, it would be difficult for him to do so. Lao Bai was a very good man, and he was very casual. He was even willing to give up everything for Lin Cece. The entertainment industry was a Vanity Fair, and he didn't want the inheritance of the family. He only wanted what he wanted. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.